This is All Out Politics, news, debate and opinion from the heart of Westminster. A new Sky Data poll suggests that 2/3 of the public think the outcome of the Brexit negotiations will be a bad deal for Britain, with 3 out of 4 people unhappy with the way Theresa May is performing. So is the country turning against Brexit? To discuss that, I'm joined by James McGrory, who's the Executive Director of Open Britain, and Hugh Bennett, Deputy Editor of Brexit Central. Welcome to you both.
Good morning.
The public doesn't seem to think it's going very well.
Well, I think clearly what's happened is it's not a case really of the public turning against Brexit per se, it's people turning against May's Brexit plan. This has all been in the wake of Chequers. I think the issue is Leave voters. They see what they voted for. You know, they voted for control of laws, money, border, and no matter how hard May tries to spin it, they know the Chequers doesn't deliver that. So I think that's why there's this dissatisfaction. I wouldn't confuse sort of dissatisfaction with May's plan for a much softer kind of Brexit with satisfaction with Brexit.
I mean, the headline figures, though, say that in a referendum people would vote to remain.
Well, I think I looked at this, and it's very interesting because this is the sort of three-way referendum, and of course we know who's putting the three-way referendum on the table. It's Remainers, because there's 1 Remain option and 2 Leave options. So they know, but by putting this on, it's going to split the Leave vote in half.
Doesn't quite work, because if you put both the Leave options together, they're still lower than the Remain option.
No, but I think when you start looking at second preferences, you start trying to couch it in these terms. It obviously becomes incredibly confusing for people. People are thinking, hang on a minute, we voted to leave already. Why are we having this three-way referendum? You know, the question of Remain or Leave was settled by the first referendum. If you really want to have a second one, maybe you could say, will you accept May's deal or do you want to leave with no deal? But I think people are going to see right through this.
Well, the choice is no deal or the deal, not Remain.
Well, I mean, we had a referendum. We had a referendum that 33 million people voted in 2 years ago, where they said we're leaving the European Union.
All right, James, it's all settled. What's all the fuss about?
Well, your viewers are the ones making the fuss, and it's people up and down the country that are making the fuss, because Theresa May's deal satisfies, or the deal at Chequers satisfies nobody. It doesn't satisfy Leave voters like you. Doesn't satisfy people like myself.
Leave with no deal. That's the only alternative, given that vote in 2016.
Well, that is Hugh's only option, but that would be catastrophic for the country. The government themselves are going to issue a series of papers over the summer.
Well, they're not, apparently.
Well, they're going to shoehorn them all into a very short period, just so the scary stories are only done over 2 or 3 days. But given that, it's hardly surprising that people up and down the country are saying this isn't the Brexit that was promised, and therefore I want a people's vote on the Brexit deal itself, with a clear option to remain.
I mean, it has to be said, ours is not the only poll recently that's shown this. Others have as well, by other organisations. So do you think the public mood has shifted?
I think undoubtedly. I think for 3 reasons. I think, firstly, the people see the government making a total mess of the Brexit negotiations. Only 1 in 10 of the people that responded to your poll thought it was going well. I think people see new facts that have come to light since the referendum that none of us could have known at the time, such as coughing up 50 billion quid in a divorce bill for nothing in return. I think perhaps most importantly, people see that the Brexit that was promised is not the one that's going to be delivered. People were told that we'd have no drop-off with our trade in Europe, that it would be the easiest trade deal in human history. That's a Liam Fox quote, and it's turned out to be nothing of the sort. And therefore, I think people see a parliament in gridlock, they see the 2 main parties bitterly divided, and they say the only way through this gridlock is to put this question to the people in a people's vote.
Nothing wrong with second thoughts, is there?
Well, I think when you look at what's happened with the EU and its attitude towards referendums over the last few decades, whenever they get a result they don't like, they call a second one. You look at what happened.
It's not them. It will be
our
Parliament.
It's the EU's
not mentioned a second referendum.
Yeah, but the EU's. Well, no, I think you had Tusk saying, yeah, we'd love the UK to stay and we'd love to have a second referendum. They're saying the only way we'll extend Article 50 is they have a second referendum. You know, this is clearly laying the sweets down the trail to sort of suck the UK into the path of a second referendum.
But nonetheless, if it's not working out, and you yourself accept it's not working out as you would like, isn't the sensible thing to look over the edge and not jump?
Well, I think it's very strange to have people like James coming on and saying it's going badly. You know, for the last 2 years, they've been saying it's essential we stay in the single market, it's essential we stay in the customs union. May's Chequers plan puts us pretty close to that, and I think after the negotiations conclude, we're probably going to end up in that sort of situation.
She has restated her red lines, both of which say we're coming out of the single market, we're coming out of the customs union. That's what the British Prime Minister, who is spearheading to say, you can't just turn around and say, well, actually, we're staying here.
But you look at the reality of the policy detail, and we're going to be much closer to that than away from it.
And I put it to you again, what is the advantage to the average citizen of leaving those two organisations?
Well, that question was decided in the referendum in 2016.
No,
we were told we'd be leaving the single market, leaving the customs union, because...
What's the practical advantage?
Practical advantages are huge. But you can sign trade deals around the world. You can actually get rid of huge swathes of damaging EU red tape, which massively encumber British businesses. You know, the fact that only 6% of British businesses export to the EU, but 100% have to apply EU regulations, it's a huge cost to the economy.
But that's not what's actually going to happen. It's the same set of arguments that were put forward over 2 years ago now, that big characters in the government, Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, Liam Fox, campaigned for, and yet they're either not delivering them or they've resigned because they're not being delivered.
But if we're going to get rid of all this red tape and get new trade deals...
But we're not. I mean, and we're not, and the public can see through that. I mean, the idea...
But that just shows how nasty the EU is, doesn't it, tying us up in all this stuff? And...
Well, it's not the EU's fault that we're not going to be able to do a big swanky trade deal with a Trump's America that's been promised. It's because Trump's purely America first. All this stuff's come to light since the referendum, and people have said this is not the Brexit that I was promised. In the same way that if you ordered a chicken dinner at a nice restaurant and it came back and it was all raw and it was disgusting and there was blood all over the plate, you'd send it back. You wouldn't pay the bill before you've checked it. And the British people can see that. They feel they've been sold a bit of a pup and they want their say. They see a political class that are squabbling, that cannot agree. They want it taken out of the hands of politicians, taken it out of the hands of Westminster and back to the country at whole, because it's going to affect all of us. And the idea that just saying, you know, the future of this country, if we're headed towards a car crash, just because there was a vote 2 years ago and everyone can see that there's going to be a massive pile-up, that we should just continue with it when it's our children and grandchildren's opportunities that are on the line, I think is a huge dereliction of duty.
No, I think you say, well, people were told they're going to be served a nice chicken dinner. Your side in the referendum told people there'd be 500,000 to 800,000 job losses. They said there'd be a recession. They said there'd be a house price crash. You know, none of this has happened. You know, the idea that people would exclusively told Brexit was going to be sunlit uplands.
First of all, as I'm sure he would say, Britain has not yet left the European Union. Secondly, the housing market has slowed down dramatically.
There's still been growth every single month
has dropped down
since the referendum.
Not in London, there hasn't. It's also growth has dropped dramatically. We've gone from the top of the league to the bottom of the league, and we haven't yet seen a whiff of any of these future trade deals from anyone.
That's because we can't negotiate trade deals because we're still in the European Union. We still apply the EU's common commercial policy, so obviously we can't negotiate trade deals.
Well, people could say, people could say, couldn't they, we can't wait. We see great opportunities in these new trade deals, and no one has said that.
I would prefer it if Theresa May had taken that approach, but I think they had
I'm talking about the other people we've got to trade with.
No, exactly. You've had Australia, you've had the US, you've had all of these countries saying, we want to do trade deals, we're just waiting for you to be ready. We need you to get out of the EU, get out of the customs union, and then we can actually do these trade deals. And people like James just want to slow us down and keep us in this sort of limbo for as long as possible. So we're stuck in this no man's land where we can't move forwards and can't move backwards.
You say that they're all queuing up to do trade deals. The American president came over to this country and gave an explosive interview to the Sun newspaper in which he said there isn't going to be a trade deal because of the difference in rules that we'd need to apply, because of the different deal we're going to have to do with the European Union. So this idea that it's just a total fiction. It's the same fantasy that you're peddling from 2.5 years ago that the British people can see through. They've rumbled you. It's not going to happen. And instead of just trying to railroad them into something that they think is going to be a disaster for this country, including a majority of Leave voters, that they think is going to be damaging to them and to their family and their community and their country, and you want to force them to go through with it, I think you'd have to live with that on your conscience for a long time, because I certainly don't want to live with it on mine. And instead of the elite in Westminster forcing this bad deal on the country, why not go back to the British people and say, do you want this? Settle the issue once and for all. What are you scared of, I would ask? I'll tell you what you're scared of. You're scared of the polling. You're scared of the people saying they don't want this.
I think if you go back to the country and say, you know what, you gave this clear instruction to us to leave the European Union, and a few people in Westminster have managed to throw so much mud on the process, do everything they can to obscure it, and ask them to vote again, you will not like the answer you get. They will tell you, thank you very much, we made our choice.
In that case, if that's where you stand, why not have another referendum, ratify your position?
Well, I don't think you should be throwing them around like constitutional playthings. Referendums should be respected for a generation. They shouldn't just have it whenever you want to sort of solve a little political issue.
Thank you both very much indeed. You're watching All Out Politics.